We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Necessary Prerequisites to Data Success, sponsored today by Validity. It is the latest installment in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A section, or if you'd like to tweet, we encourage you to share highlights or questions via Twitter using #DataEd. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And to open and access either the Q&A or the chat panels, you may find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen for those features. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely change that chat with everyone throughout. And to answer the most commonly asked questions, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within 2 business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and will likewise send a link of the recording of the session as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me turn it over to Elliot for a brief word from our sponsor, Validity. Elliot, hello and welcome.
Thank you very much, Shannon. And really a great pleasure to be here and for Validity to be sponsoring today's webinar. So welcome to our forward to today's webinar, and the session is going to be on decades in the making, how we ended up with data chaos and how to fix it. CRM systems have been a key tool for organizations for more than 2 decades now, and it has been quite the journey. Throughout the ages, there have been common themes plaguing CRM data management and resulting quality. Moreover, there are key characteristics of those organizations excelling with their data quality in the modern age. We begin our journey with the dark ages, before CRM was a mainstream topic. Manual customer data management was at the core of a pre-CRM world. Private and personal spreadsheets, personal notebooks were used by all of us to store customer data and information. This gave way during database marketing's emergence, the targeting of audience members and customers most likely to react in a positive way to your company's message. However, there was a missing piece: centralized storage of customer data in the pursuit of this more effective customer communication and resulting improved relationships. And this is where CRM was born. It was a revolutionary concept and a huge success, not least for those first movers, helping companies make that shift. An example being Salesforce, acquiring over 5,000 customers in their first 14 months. However, there were issues from day one. Data management was already at the forefront. Those previously disparate private and personal data storage methods led to huge duplication issues with now centralized CRM systems. It was critical for success in this age to focus on new process adoption alongside having effective systems in place for the consolidation of this pre-existing data. For those who did not embrace those 2 aspects, data chaos ensued. So CRM had now been born, and whilst growing very, very aggressively, it was becoming more accessible to companies of all shapes and sizes. Word was simply spreading. Growth at such a pace that Salesforce themselves had over 15,000 customers within their first 6 years of business. That's a lot of different implementations with differing data needs, right? And common issues became apparent very quickly. With all adoption curves, they're two-sided. Companies began to realize that the CRM novelty wore off pretty quickly and descended into data chaos, rather than these systems being a single source of truth as desired by all. Something had to be done. Perhaps the biggest sign of all that a CRM system alone was not enough is the ecosystem that grew around it. We saw Salesforce's App Exchange born, alongside CRM systems expanding into new areas of businesses, marketing, service, support, legal, and many, many more. CRM was now critical across entire businesses, and broader data quality issues grew in appearance and impact: standardization of data, mass modification of data, lead conversion, importing and exporting data in a safe way, just to name a few. Those in the market began to realize that solutions were required to help manage and optimize data quality, providing the means for businesses to be more effective communicating externally and make better decisions internally to make sense of their data chaos. CRM systems had now, to an extent, outgrown themselves within organizations. There was need for a revolution, a coup to the data chaos. So data management is very much bound to the scale of any company's CRM implementation, right? Cross-functional and business critical at this point. Data never stands still, and neither could management of its quality. Decisions made by a business have a direct relationship to this. Is this decision correct for today, or when the data was entered 6 weeks ago? This is made even harder by the fact that CRM systems in this age were now taking data in from more places than ever. Cross-functional usage of the systems, ecosystems of integrations, and supplemental software all meant that previous workflows simply were untenable in maintaining the quality of data. Efficiency is a hallmark of the Industrial Revolution. Automation and process replacing people time. However, companies continued to neglect their most valuable asset, their data. In fact, recent validity research found that 63% are still manually identifying and correcting data quality issues. So there are clearly still barriers in place that are halting companies in their pursuit of effective data quality management. Thus, the chaos continued, and it continued all the way to the modern age. That today there are a few common themes hinted at already that are pivotal to organizations at the top of their game. In another study conducted by Validity on the state of CRM data management, 8% of participants, or as they were later named, the Elite 8, all shared higher satisfaction in their lead to customer conversion rates, had higher confidence in their data, and more accurate sales forecasts than the rest. So the question is why? Well, at the heart of it are three concepts for this Elite 8. Lifting the chaos and allowing them to find that single source of truth and customer 360-degree view. Well, the first of which is leadership prioritization. Data has to be cleaned if leadership wants their reporting to steer them in the best strategic direction. And this can't be done without the right tools. If leadership doesn't stay on top of data quality, neither will anyone else. Secondly, we have cross-functional data operations. Every business should have a data operations team that nurtures and maintains this amazing and most valuable asset, working cross-functionally with all areas of the business. Just as HR manages, nurtures, and maintains employees, so should this data operations team do the same for the customer data. And in the modern age in particular, and in the future, it's critical to ensure that when managing and nurturing this data, it's really important to set rules on how you use it, where you capture it, and how long you keep it for. When it comes to your data, put simply, you get out of it what you put into it. And this is why Demand Tools from Validity exists. It is the secure data management platform that ensures your data remains your most valuable asset. Working today with Salesforce CRM and Dynamics 365, we do this in three major ways. First, we help you manage your data in minutes, not months. Deduplicating, standardizing, and managing CRM data is so time-consuming, it simply takes a back seat to other priorities. Demand Tools makes prioritizing your data quality a benefit instead of a burden by allowing you to manage your data in a fraction of the time. Secondly, we mentioned there around leadership prioritization, we help you get report-ready data that your business can trust. Data enter Salesforce from a load of different sources, all with their own formats and duplicates to data you're already holding within that system. We automate the cleanup of that data you capture so you can generate trustworthy reports and achieve your goals faster. And last but not least, again, that cross-functional piece. We help you market, sell, and support more effectively. Poor data quality adds friction to all areas of the customer journey. Demand Tools gives you better data hygiene to protect your customer experience and decrease sales, marketing, and operational costs. Better yet, the brand new Demand Tools V release offers CRM admins and others within an organization a 14-day free trial so you can begin to understand your data chaos. Perhaps you don't quite know where to start. Trialists even get a free data quality assessment brand new to this version of Demand Tools, which will help you identify the largest areas of vulnerability within your CRM today. Where is your data quality lacking in your accounts, your opportunities, and other areas? A really great tool to understand your chaos. So we've gone through very quickly the evolution of CRM systems and its data, highlighted how we landed with data chaos, the three areas in those excelling today: leadership prioritization, cross-functional data operations, and ongoing data governance. Demand tools can help with them by managing your CRM data at scale and in an automated fashion to help you and your business gain trust in your most valuable asset, your data. And our free data quality assessment is a great way to get a benchmark of where you stand with your own data quality management and will give you a starting point to tackle your challenges. Thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the webinar. And Shannon, it's back over to you.
Elliot, thank you so much for this great presentation. And thanks to Validity for sponsoring today's webinar and help making these webinars happen. And if you have any questions for Elliot, he will likewise be joining us for the Q&A portion of the webinar at the end today. So now let me introduce to you our speaker for the series, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter is an internationally recognized data management thought leader. Many of you already know him or have seen him at conferences worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions to the profession. He has written dozens of articles and 12 books. The most recent is Data Literacy, Achieving Higher Productivity for Citizens, Knowledge Workers, and Organizations. Peter is experienced with more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and constantly named as a top data management expert. Some of the most important and largest organizations in the world have sought out his expertise. Peter has spent multi-year immersions with groups as diverse as U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Walmart. And with that, let me turn everything over to Peter to get his presentation started. Hello and welcome.
And welcome to you, Shannon. It's good to talk to everybody today and talk a little bit about, we'll keep the fairy tale theme going as Elliot started out to in the past and all that. And everything Elliot said is correct. We haven't paid enough attention to our data. So just going in and trying to do something to it isn't really the best way to work. And these are necessary prerequisites to data success that we're going to talk about today. So the first little item to look at is perhaps why is there confusion around this? And the main thing has been that IT has long thought that data is a business problem. The typical attitude has been, if they can connect to the server, then my job is done. And we've probably all heard that in one form or another, unless we're of the younger persuasion. On the other hand, the business thinks that IT is well managing the data adequately. After all, what else would a person whose title is Chief Information Officer actually be doing it? And as a result, data has fallen into an enormous gap between business and IT. And it's our goal to repair that gap and to work more closely together with everybody as we go back into this. The data debt around this is what we talk about, how long it's going to take you just to get up to even in this case, because many organizations haven't done anything close to that. It also means that you have new skills that you're going to have to learn, because you now have to learn how to clean up and then move forward in order to do this. So if you're at zero, if you have nothing else and you don't need Elliot's tools because your data is in great shape, that's wonderful. Even there, you're probably going to need a typical annual proof of value. And of course, if you haven't cleaned up your data debt, you need to do both at the same time, which is a very difficult challenge. Almost all data challenges involve some form of interoperability, and yet there's very little guidance optimizing data management practices and very, very little guidance at how to get back to zero, much less go forward. So here are our 7 deadly data sins. No, we don't name them after the biblical versions of it. While that's fun, it's not quite as useful here. The first one really is failing to address culture and change management challenges. And for those of you that are seeing me for the first time, we've got some new software in from Apple. The Keynote feature now has allowed you to do some minor little video and push some video up over the screen. So we'll try a little of that and see how it works here as well. But again, our first topic here is failing to address cultural and change management systems. And part of the reason is because people like me tend to go around and mouth off and say CIOs are not doing as much. In fact, I was going to title my first book on this subject, CIOs Are Not. But that was deemed excessively rude in there. And all I meant from that is to say that the Chief Information Officer is not really focusing 100% on information, and areas of focus are very important. If we look in there, what a chief is a person who's the head of an organized body, the person in highest authority, chief of police along those lines. We might have a chief financial officer, we might have a chief risk officer, we might have a chief medical officer, all of which are fabulous. And notice one thing that they don't do. The chief financial officer typically does not balance the books for the organization. The chief risk officer does not test the software, and the chief medical officer does not really perform surgery. Again, they're focused on policy issues. They're focused on making these aspects of the organization as useful to the organization as possible. So while I don't necessarily like the title CDO, it is the title we're using at the moment. And just another little point on this is when I published this book and had the Chinese translation done, it actually turned into what they called Chief Data Officer Combat, because there is a bit of tension back and forth between both of these activities. And that tension leads to confusion, uncertainty, doubt, resentment, and resistance. Thank you, Mario, for those wonderful words. Even though they are a bit old, it hasn't changed a whole lot since then. And when we look at this, it's critically important, if you want your organization to do more with data, to investigate the process of change management and leadership. Because if you don't, there will not be any significant changes in the way things work. Now, this, you'll notice, is a old-fashioned lock that requires everything to line up. And I use a metaphor when I'm diagnosing things that are happening in organizations. If I go into an organization and I see vision, skills, incentive, and an action plan, but I also observe frustration, I'll know for sure that they're missing resources. Similarly, when I see a vision, incentive, resources, and an action plan, but I see anxiety, I also observe that the skills are missing. And this is a wonderful little checklist that Mary Lippitt put together a couple of years back on this that allows you to diagnose the problem. So if you look down on the side, on the right-hand side here, you'll probably see some things that might be confusion about your organization as well. Again, if you have vision, skills, resources, and an action plan, but you're missing the incentives, you're going to get gradual change instead of some real plan. And of course, as the little graphic in the bottom right-hand corner shows, you need to have all of these in place in order to actually unlock the change that you're looking for. And culture remains the biggest impediment to shifting organizational thinking about data. If you have an interest in this particular topic, I have a absolutely free, no cost, no registration, downloadable case study that you can get into that most of my students have to learn at some point in there. So that was the first one, not too bad, failing to address culture and change management initiatives. The next one then is not sequencing data strategy implementation. And by that, I mean there's certain things that have to occur before other things in order to do this. This is the DIMBOK. If you haven't seen it or are seeing it for the first time, that's shame on me. This is something that DAMA International put together in 2009 and has made an update now in 2017 to talk about what's in here. But one of the things we didn't put in this wonderful iconic wheel that we've been using now for years and years is the fact that some of these have to occur before others. In general, you can see we did at least get the idea that data governance is connected to lots of things, but many people will just call me up on a regular basis and say, hey, I want to jump straight into document and content management or straight into data quality management. And these are usually part of another initiative. In fact, the secret to this is getting probably 3 of these aligned in the way that you want to have them aligned. That's the first of our sequencing pieces. Let me give you another one. This is actually a photograph of where I'm calling you from today, and you can see why I don't have very much internet, because I live out in the rural part of Virginia on here. But that's not the point. What I'm showing you here is a series of photographs that I took of a barn. Now, if you don't know me at all, I am what's called a horse husband, and that means that the barn is an important aspect of what goes on here. You may ask the question, why did we take pictures of the foundation of our barn? Well, first of all, we borrowed money from a bank to do it. And the bank gave us exactly this much money to start with and said before further construction can proceed, we want to make absolutely certain that we have a very good foundation, because if we build a good barn on a poor foundation, we will end up with problems, and that could jeopardize repayment of the loan. This, of course, makes good business sense, but yet there is no IT equivalent in this, and we have to work on that in order to get where we want to go. And one of the best ways to envision the way that should work out is by taking a quick look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Some of you may remember Maslow from high school or so. That Maslow was the one who observed that if we have food, clothing, and shelter needs that are met, we can never be safe. Excuse me, that are unmet, we can never be safe. And of course, if we're never safe, we're never going to be part of something that is bigger than us. And if we're never part of something that's bigger than us, it's going to be very difficult to know how we are as compared to others in this. And this lack of self-esteem then prevents the final place people would like to go, which is self-actualization. You may not know me very well, but I love what I do. And so it's quite obvious. I'm very fortunate that I can self-actualize. Another word for this is flow. And if you go to the TED Talks, you'll see that they've appropriated the term flow, of this natural state of being very, very comfortable and creative while you're working. Now, the reason I show you this is because, of course, it's very similar in the data world in the sense that everybody wants to do the parts that are self-actualization parts, master data management, Bitcoin, you name it. These are all just technologies, though. And if we don't understand anything else from this talk, please take away that that is just the tip of the data iceberg, and that we have to have foundational data practices in place, just the same way as my barn had to have a solid, inspected version of a foundation in order to do this. And these things that are below the waterline, typically unseen, not really known about, certainly not taught in standard academic curriculum programs, these are organizational capabilities. And those capabilities are crucial to have in place in order to do this. Yet, the question that I get most often at Anything Awesome when people call me up and ask me to help out is that they say, can you do all this faster? I understand that you need to do it, but can you do it faster? And I'd love to say, if you do it faster, it will take longer. If you do it faster, it will cost more. If you do it faster, it will deliver less. If you do it faster, it will present greater risk. Again, thank you, Tom DeMarco, for those wonderful inspirational words as we look in here. So we have a situation in data where we are not enforcing sequencing, and we should enforce it in this case. I'm relying on you all to actually deliver this message to your management, because your management doesn't spend time to talk and take courses at Dataversity around this. Let's look at another sequencing component here as well, and this is a strategy implementation component as well. I'm going to give you a standard 4-quadrant chart. Quadrant 1 is organizations without a formal data strategy. Hopefully you agree that that is a bad idea and not something that we want to emulate. And that if we are going to move into strategy, strategy always involves one of two options, either innovation or improving existing operations. And so for quadrant 2, we'll put Walmart over there. Walmart in quadrant 2 has been long recognized as incredibly efficient and effective in these areas, and doing quite a capable job of it along the way. Let's go to quadrant 3 then. Quadrant 3, we'll put Apple in and assume that Apple is making new things, being innovative about what they do. The key there, of course, is to use data to create strategic opportunities. And when we look at those two, one of the things that happens is people say, well, both of those things are good, we ought to do both of them. And again, I would recommend that not as a good idea, primarily because, let's just take it as a quick example. Johnny Ive used to be the British guy who would talk at the new Apple product releases, and he would, be a very erudite presentation on the wonderful curves of the new iPhone 6, 7, whatever it was that they were putting out in here. And I just want you to imagine we telling Johnny Ive to be cheap, because that's the message down here at Walmart. And I don't mean they're cheap, but everyday low price is in fact the corporate slogan. And the idea here is that taking these guys and being cheap is equally as silly to move them up here into quadrant 3 and say, be innovative. Let's keep the innovative people doing what they do, and let's keep the cheap people, or let's call them efficiency and effectiveness people doing this in this level. And does it not make more sense to start out by learning how to save money in your improvement of operations, and then use that money to invest in your innovation plays out there? So this is the kind of thing I mean by sequencing. There are several very definitive ones that we'd want you all to take a look at in doing this. And you'll see there's a lot more that goes on if you get the books and things that are available around about this as well. Deadly sin number 5 is failing to manage expectations. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that know very little about data, and that becomes a challenge for us as well. So if we're just getting started with data, one of the things most people do is, it seems normal, they start out with some business needs, they look at them and they say, let's make a solution to those business needs. Unfortunately, that is incorrect because it's leaving out a very important component, and that is, what is the current state of your organization? Again, I'll just give an analogy here. Many of you might have known or have a 15-year-old that's getting ready to learn how to drive. The last thing you do is hand them the keys to your brand new Tesla and say, good luck, go off and do it, right? We instead look at where the existing organizational capabilities are, and only when we understand them should we then target some strategic data imperatives. Those strategic data imperatives can then lead us to a roadmap that will involve leadership working in the area and starting to address some of the cultural issues that I described earlier. One other point on this particular chart, a really wonderful example here of, you have to deliver business value that I mentioned before, but you at the same time have to deliver some new capabilities. It's very unlikely that you're going to be able to take your organization and simply work with the existing capability set. So you're going to have some balance here between business value and new capabilities. If you deliver all new capabilities but no business value, the organization is going to think that you are a science experiment. And if you deliver business value without keeping those capabilities and internalizing those capabilities as an organizational asset, then you will not have the ability to sustain the initiative that you have. I've been into one very large pharma company 3 different times, giving them the same message, and each time something happened here where they delivered business value, but they did not put the capabilities in place, and they call me back up and say, Peter, come back and teach it to us again. And I can go to the shared drive where I left my stuff last time and pull it out and talk about it. Let's talk about another component of expectations here as well, and that is, what does it cost to do this? Again, let's just assume that you have a relatively large size team and everybody's getting paid $100,000 per year, so that's $500,000 that we have. One of the first questions that we need to ask is this considered to be an overhead function? Because unfortunately, people think of overheads as costs, and we don't want them to exclusively think of this, but there certainly is a component that gets in there. And I like to ask this group then, do they feel obligated to demonstrate $500,000 in benefits annually? Now, I had one group tell me, that was a group of 5 in there, and they said, well, when are you going to be done with this? And they said, that's okay. My CIO gave me 5 years to finish, so there won't be any problem at all. If you know anything about the longevity of CIOs, they tend to last from 2 to 4 years. So betting somebody is going to be there in 5 years is probably not a bet that you should make in that instance. And even if we do, the revised benefits goal has now risen by $500,000 a year for the 5 years, giving us a total of $2.5 million that we now have to come up with just to break even in that whole process. We also like to help organizations look for uncommon ways of getting access and boosting their program. One of the best ways is one that we run here in Virginia, which is the Commonwealth's Data Interns Program, where we have wonderful universities from all over the state that are working in this. We'll pick a note that Governor McAuliffe started this, and he lost his bid for re-election this week. So sorry about that, actually last week, but sorry about that, Governor. We'll have to see if the new Republican governor also wants to get in and continue this program onwards here. But these are very good ways of helping the organization understand and meet expectations around all of this. So that was our 5th deadly data sin. Our 4th one now is not aligning the data program with IT projects. Very important in order to do this, because most organizations practice what I call IT project-centric or application-centric development. And why wouldn't they? It's the only thing that we have taught them for the past 30 years. You start out with some strategy, you make some IT projects in there, and oh yeah, we need to have some data in there as well. Well, not the best way to think about it, certainly not the best way to implement it. If you want to dive into what's wrong with this further, I will recommend Dave McComb's wonderful book here, Software Wasteland. He's done a great job of laying out the entire case. And watch carefully on the screen here, because the fix is simple, although it's not really simple. That's actually one of the hardest transitions organizations can make, switching from IT project-centric to data-centric in this. It's as hard as an organization shifting from a product orientation to a service orientation, and there are good examples of those as well. The key is that we start with strategy and then figure out the data. We can now develop the data assets of the organization from an organization-wide perspective, as opposed from a narrow application-centric perspective, that the systems that we create can now support and complement organizational process architecture flows, and we can maximize our data potential reuse on this. Again, a little bit more in another one of the books. Put a little plug in. The books are on sale during the webinar here, so you're welcome to go off and get them, and we have a special at the end. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Let's look at this strategy and governance context a little bit more from the alignment perspective. Organizational strategy is the only reason for a data strategy to exist, and the data strategy should support data assets being used to achieve the organizational objectives. If not, one might ask the question, what is going on? Similarly, then, our data strategy, focusing in on data governance, says what should the data assets do to support strategy, and governance is about fixing those components. Again, the data debt that I've mentioned a couple times already today. Feedback from that is going to be, how well is that data strategy working? You can see the loop is very, very tight there. I'm going to take it a little further, because this is Peter's webinar, so Peter gets to make the rules on this. I would like, of course, data governance to also make recommendations to IT about IT project investments, because the IT projects can be eliminated. 20 to 40% of IT spending can be completely eliminated by doing much better in the data governance area on that, and that those IT projects then have an impact on operational operations. And we'll put a couple of feedback loops in there just to make sure we get it all lined up. But that's a complex picture, and I really wouldn't show that to people. I would keep it more along these lines here, and just emphasize that data strategy should be specified in terms of addressing specific business goals. If we don't address the business goals, they tend to become lost, and then the data efforts are not as useful as they could be to the organizational efforts overall. Similarly, I would recommend that the language of data governance is in fact metadata, how to use our data assets and the data about those data assets to more quickly eliminate the data debt, deliver data innovations around that. So currently, most IT programs are not aligned with a data program. In fact, most organizations do not have a data program. They have a series of data projects that they're doing their best with, but it is still a very difficult process around that. Number 3 here, not implementing a robust means of sharing data. And I've already mentioned that data is not a project. It has an asset life of much greater than a year in many cases. And one of the nice things about living as long as I have is that I've been able to go back and visit organizations that I worked with almost 40 years ago in some instances, certainly 30 and 20 years ago. And guess what? They're all doing the same thing with the same data. None of it has really changed. Consequently, when we talk about reasonable project deliverables, it may be okay to talk about 90-day increments or sprints in 14 days, but data evolution needs to be measured differently. And it's important for people to understand that. I've said many times, and many others do as well, that one of the first things a new data leader should do is to take stock of the existing data assets they have. So somebody says, data inventory. You can finish that by Friday, can't you, Peter? Well, as far as I know, no organization has ever completed its data inventory. And that what we really need to do is understand that we need a mechanism for capturing salient points about our data assets in there and be able to use them and access them going forward, because data does evolve at a genuinely slow pace. That's not to say that you can't do tremendous damage to your data assets in a short amount of time. I've witnessed several organizations do that. But more importantly, your data is significantly more stable than the technology and the process components of your architecture that your organization is using in this. And that if you have ready-made architectural components from the data perspective, that will complement your Agile development efforts. If you're working Agile, that's terrific. We're going to come back to Agile in just a few minutes and look at it, how it's also inspired what we call the data doctrine here. But these Agile development, if it's running along and all of a sudden you discover that you have a data error in the middle of your Agile sprint, you need to pull the ripcord and stop the sprint and move your efforts into another effort on this while you fix the data pieces on it, because the only alternative, as particularly in a sprint function, is to create additional data silos. Now, don't feel badly about it. That means you'll be employable for a long time, but you're probably not putting in place the infrastructure that the organization really deserves to have, having somebody as talented as yourself in the organization. Let's talk about project implementation too. I've mentioned before, and again, I'm a tenured university professor, and I apologize to the world because tenured university professors, as well as untenured university professors, have been teaching people wrong how to build projects. Again, we do this as this is what you do to build projects. You do some requirements, then you do design, then you implement, then you verify, and then you maintain. Of course, if you've ever been involved in this in a real world situation, you know that there's a lot of iteration between these, but that's only discovered by our students after they get out in the world and start working for you all. They don't teach that iteration as part of the process. In fact, they teach that you can develop and implement all of your software and all of your data requirements within a single cycle for this. Now, the cycle is, again, wrong. That's why I'm crossing it out there. Data management and software development must be separated and sequenced. If you do not, you will not achieve success in this. And that goes against literally every piece of teaching that we've done for the past 30 years. It's so bad, in fact, if you think about this model that we teach students how to build, it means that this approach can only work when no sharing of data occurs. How are you going to share data into this project and out of this project if you haven't defined the data flows as part of the project? And of course, they haven't been in most cases. So what you need to understand is that we may have project one here that I was just describing in a very small way, and it wants to integrate with data from project two. That's over here on the right-hand side of your screen. And the only way that's going to happen in most organizations is if we create a third project to put in place to integrate the data between project one and project two. IT is and should be largely a project discipline, but shared data structures require programmatic data development and evaluation. And when I say programmatic, I mean that in the project management sense. So here is a bit from the project management body of knowledge, which we modeled our DIMBOK after. I've already mentioned that in here. And I'm not going to read you all the words on here. I'm going to talk about the differences between programs and projects. And one of the first things that's a difference between a program and a project is that a project has a start and an end. Well, guess what? Data does not have a start and an end in most cases. And consequently, just that alone justifies the ability to bring it into a programmatic sense on this. Again, change management is going to be an executive leadership capability. We've talked about that already. We have hooks into the financial calendar in a programmatic sense that do not exist in a project sense. And if you're still having trouble convincing management that data is a program, use this little phrase that has proven very successful over the years. Your data program is going to last at least as long as your HR program. After all, nobody's going to look at your HR program and say, hey, I think that we've hired enough people, and I think everybody who has been hired is well trained and will behave themselves, and we won't need lawyers or lawsuits or anything else around here. No, HR is going to stay here because it is seen as a necessary component for how the organization attracts and manages its human capital. In order to manage your organization's data capital, you are also going to need a programmatic effort. And there's an interesting parallelism in the journey of HR. About 80 years ago, HR was dispersed the same way as data knowledge is dispersed in most of our organizations. And management looked at this and said, it used to be our thought that the work group would do the best job of hiring the best candidate, but we've learned some things since then, and we now have controls in place and things that we should do that are not part of work group, and that hiring would be done centralized in most organizations to make sure that we can have quality, have specialists, and also maintain within the guidelines that are given to us in order to do this. Your HR program is not going away, and you have to tie the fact that your data program needs to be there as well until the organization closes its doors. So that is our fourth data deadly sin. Next one is this. Oh, I'm sorry. No, we're in the robust programmatic means of sharing data. I was one off on that on there. Let's go to number two, lacking qualified data leadership. Now, as I've already grumbled several times on this call, the typical IT, computer science, information systems, computer engineering curriculum does not teach them the right stuff, but it's worse than that. How many of you out there have had a good course in data as part of your knowledge worker training? All of them, of course, need it. That is the definition of a knowledge worker. You can't have knowledge without information, and you can't have information without data. Yet virtually none of them are taught about data, and yet, of course, 100% of them deal with it daily. I've already groused about the teaching of the professionals in this area. If you want to be an IT professional, we give you exactly one course on how to build a new Oracle database. Now, let's just pause for a minute and thank Oracle for giving it away, first of all, or we would have no databases that we're teaching in the university, no name brand databases that we'd be teaching in the university. It'd be all Postgres or something like that. But more to the point, if there is a skill we do not need any more of on planet Earth, it is how to build new databases. So we really need to rethink whether that one course that we teach IT professionals about data should be focused so intensively on how to build a new database. And there's two reasons for this. I've already mentioned the first one. We don't need any more qualified people to build databases on planet Earth. We have plenty as it is. But what impressions do people who are not full-time data people get when they look at a 10-course concentration or a 10-course master's degree and see that 1/10 of that course is devoted to how to build new databases? They figure out in their minds correctly that the only thing we need data people for is a technical skill developing new databases. By the way, that statement is completely false, and I hope that you agree with it in there. But at the same time, if we are only teaching people how to build new databases, we will not have the ability to do anything along the lines of getting this broader knowledge that we need to have in the overall process. The key is, of course, that if you teach people how to use a hammer, every problem tends to look like a nail. And I should qualify that first statement. If you teach people only how to use a hammer, every problem tends to look like a nail in that process. And I want you to also examine how difficult it might be to do some hiring around that, because if we're asking people who are generally unqualified to hire people who we want to be data qualified, we have a very tricky problem right there as well. Let's go on to the next one. Again, top data job in here. When we talk about trying to maintain the ideas around data, one of the things we've discovered pretty conclusively is that somebody needs to run this just the same way as we have a top HR job. Actually, I should have put that on this chart. I didn't on there. But a top data job will nevertheless be part of what needs to happen in this. You could also call it an enterprise data executive. Many organizations have chosen to go that particular route. The vernacular for it is, of course, the chief data officer. And the chief data officer will lead the data governance initiatives, among other things in there, and coordinate with the top IT job in order to do these bits and pieces here. Let's talk about three things that the top data job should focus on. One, just focus solely on data asset leveraging, nothing else. We've got an HR person that focuses on nothing else. Data is easily as valuable as our HR assets in most organizations, so that's a very good equivalency there. That they need to be unconstrained by an IT project mindset. And by that, I mean that IT likes to start and stop things as they should. That's the way you properly manage projects. However, if you try to run your data program as a series of unconnected, non-programmatic driven projects, you will not succeed. Finally, I'd like to see all of us report to the business, because if we report into IT has this baggage that they bring with them that is that IT project mindset. And people do not know or appreciate and have not done a good job with it. Again, the reason data debt exists in most organizations because IT was not well trained or educated in our college and university systems, and consequently, there's a big challenge. I've mentioned these challenges as well. Another major challenge for the chief data officer is that most organizations don't know who to hire. So while I said it was tough with the hiring panel, the typical CDO at this point is only lasting a year. And so one of the things you might think about is sort of a two-phase approach to hiring your data leadership and, again, eliminating your data debt. The first one is one who comes in and makes a lot of changes in the organization, uses up all of their capital, their organizational political capital in here, and then at the end of the year, sort of moseys on their way. It's a very big challenge in organizations, but this is definitely the results that we're seeing out there, is that the first one tends to take one for the team. And we're seeing some organizations start to rent these individuals, just as the same way you can rent a fractional CFO or a fractional HR manager for your organizations as well. So we're getting to the top here now. Again, the top of the pile says we've lacked data leadership, and now what we're doing is not understanding data-centric thinking. And that's a big challenge here. Again, I've already mentioned 20 to 40% of all IT budgets are spent migrating data from one place to another, converting data from one place to another, or improving data from one place to another. And if you can find ways of eliminating busy work, that was the word I was looking for, eliminating busy work, or making your conversion process more smooth, or implementing something like the wonderful 10 steps of data quality that Danette's new book talks about. These are all wonderful ways of achieving some savings around this. The key, of course, is to understand and look for these opportunities. If you're not looking for them, you can be sure nobody else in your organization is looking for them either when they're trying to do this. And this sense of what does it mean to be data centric or data driven or data focused or data first, or we've even heard the word data provocateur out there, which are great. And the problem is, while these are wonderful sentiments, I don't believe that anybody really has any idea what any of this means. So I've taken some steps with my co-author Todd and done some thinking on this, and I'm going to present to you now the second version of our thinking around this, inspired, of course, by the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. Let me tell a brief story of where this came from. The agilemanifesto.org is out there, has thousands of people who looked at this and said, you know what? The process of developing software has become overly focused on process and tools, has been overly focused on comprehensive documentation, has been overly focused on contract negotiation, and has been overly focused on following an original plan. But the only thing the Agile Manifesto said was, we're going to value individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change over the things on the right-hand side of this. So again, imitation is, of course, the sincerest form of flattery. On here is something we call the Data Doctrine version 2. It's version 2 because version 1 came out in 2017, and this has been updated now for our digital age in order to do this. And if you go to the website that you'll see out there, thedatadoctrine.com, we're uncovering ways of developing IT systems and by doing it and by helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value, and here are our 4 things that we've put in here. And just as the Agile manifesto reads, we're going to add the caveat here that there is value with the things on the right, but we value the things on the left more. Let's look at each of them individually as we wind our way back to the top of the hour. Right at first, data programs driving IT programs. I've already given you a little bit on that in the sense that data programs are completely at a different cadence, rhythm, speed. I'm not sure what word we should use in there, but they just don't align with IT projects. So we want our data programs driving the IT projects and programs as opposed to the other way around, which is the way it has been, which has resulted in the enormous data debt that most organizations are trying to slog their way out of. If we think about it, IT has actually gotten quite good at doing things. We can now throw new servers up in a virtual fashion in just a series of keystrokes, and we no longer have to wait for people to ship servers to us, right? These are all very, very good things. But as I've said several times, data evolves at a much slower pace. And consequently, aligning these two has been very problematic for most organizations. And in fact, we should really just give up and say, let's flip it the other way around, that the data evolution needs to be separated from, needs to be external to, and precede system development activities, whether you are building or buying. In a little more succinct manner, we can say data and IT must be separated and sequenced, as I was talking about earlier in the program here. I'll give you just a couple of quick examples around this and why it's so problematic. Here is a running query from a very fine organization who just didn't happen to know anything about query optimization. So we can take that same query and optimize it. And somebody says and pats me on the head and said, hey, Peter, very good. You took a query that used to run in a second and you've now made it run in a half a second. Okay, are you proud of yourself? And I said, well, yeah, in the sense that, do you know how often that query runs? And the answer was, no, I don't actually. And it turns out if it runs billions of times a day, those half seconds add up to dollars and cents pretty quickly. Small little things going incorrect in your data environment will continue to compound. Now, we use the term death by 1,000 cuts, but that is such a bad term to use because nobody is actually dying. So when you say death by 1,000 cuts, people go and tune out. Instead, what we really should be saying is that your organization is working while bleeding. Again, it's a week after Halloween, and I apologize for the goriness, but if we could turn those blood stains into dollar signs and let people understand that they are bleeding unnecessarily from a lot of cuts, we will be better able to understand how we can align our programs, how the data doctrine actually works in a more comprehensive situation. Because poor data manifests itself in very many different ways in the organization. Most often it is filtered through some sort of IT or business process or other architectural construct in order to do this. And people do not recognize that there is oftentimes something common in these results without being just poor results. And the thing that's common is that all business problems have a data component to them. And if you don't have a group of people that understand how to do this, you will never have people looking for it. So what we want to do is to take our data professionals and give them a little bit of knowledge about how to track down these challenges in here from the business through IT programs, through business processes and all the rest of the things that we look at, but that it comes to a central team. Now, oftentimes when I'm working with organizations, they'll be very happy to give me 10% of 10 people's time. And I would much rather have 100% of one person's time than 10% of it. Because with a focused team, you can start to deploy specialized, repeatable processes that help the organization recognize these things earlier and gets good at it in order to do this. So this is what we mean by driving IT programs. We'd also value then informed information investing over technology acquisition. Before you buy software or rent cloud space, you should ask for a logical data model in order to do this. Again, let's just take a look at an example. Here is a fairly rudimentary data model here, shown just at the logical level. These are the entities: person, employee, position, and job class, something that you might see as part of a standard HR system. And I'll put a couple business rules up here. Business rule number 1 in purple there is one employee can be associated with exactly one person or potentially no persons on this. Same type of rule here down here at the bottom. Again, one employee can be associated with one position. Well, these leave out some practices that likely occur in your organizations. They may moonlight. For example, a person may work a full-time job during the day, but then pick up an hourly position at night. Or in the employee position, we know that there's a lot of organizations that are hurting for employees right at the moment. We're in the middle of the Great Resignation, et cetera, et cetera. These job sharing or moonlighting activities have to be done manually with this particular data structure. Now, what I'm urging, of course, is that the organizations acquire these data structures as a condition of doing business with them, either buying or renting their software. Show us what's going on here. I'm going to now change the data model just ever so slightly and put in a little bit more flexibility in here in order to understand it. Now we have a person can be 0, 1 or more, 0, 1 or more employees can be associated with a single person, as in a person can be multiple employees, which makes it a whole lot easier to do payroll and keep track of accounting, et cetera, et cetera. Similarly, the job sharing piece now has gone into 0, 1 or more employees can be associated with a position. So now I can share that job by having somebody work up until noon every day and somebody work afternoon every day. I can also go through and have somebody work Monday and Friday and somebody else work Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in order to do these. I think I said that all correctly. And again, these data structures need to be specified before we purchase the software, rent the software, or build the software in order to do it. Because if we don't, we will be unable to understand that there's a difference in overhead on our two organizations. I'll just point out that this particular one on the right, the less flexible data structure, the one I started out with, requires 2 additional structural loops in order to be able to process all the data around with it. Again, data structures must be specified prior to IT acquisition or development on this. We're getting close to the top here, just 2 more of these to do. Stable shared data structures are valued over IT component evaluation. Yes, it's good that we keep our IT correctly, but if we look at developing shared data structures as a programmatic activity, the more we use, the faster and the easier it is to build. And consequently, we end up with a situation where we are now starting out on the left-hand side of this diagram where nobody's really sure what this activity was because it was kind of vague and gray, but by the time we've done it a couple times, where we get over here on the right, we now understand the utility of organizational data in order to do this. And again, shared data structures cannot exist without programmatic development and evaluation. If they don't exist in your organization well, then what you're probably having is a situation where the organization is doing this informally instead of formally. And if we could do it formally, we could develop some expertise around there in order to do this. I'd like to sort of finish out here with the idea that my profound lesson that I've learned in my entire life is garbage in and garbage out. And I hope you all have learned that one as well. I use it this way. I say that bad data plus anything awesome is still going to be problematic results in order to come up with that, or garbage in, garbage out. And what that means is that if you've got a perfect model that's sitting at the center of everything, or a data warehouse, or a machine learning algorithm, or business intelligence, or blockchain, or AI, you can see I can run out of breath here before I finish all the rest of these. Virtually any type of technology is going to have the same suffering. Bad data is going to lead you to bad results. And if we understand that by improving the quality of the data that we have around there, we can simplify data flows, harmonize them, come up with things that are good, and now start to pump good data into our various technologies that we have in place. And then those can start to put out good results. But unfortunately, in today's environment, I'll take one example in particular, machine learning and AI, we are out of data. Literally, there is no more data that we have in order to train these algorithms. So we need to go back in and rethink the process. it is putting a big challenge on the AI community right at the moment as we do this. Our last little one here is, again, data reuse over new sources, and this one's pretty easy. If we have data that exists here in program A, B, and C, and it's controlled by the gray database in application domain 1, that works really well. But if we have a similar database over in looking at programs D, E, and F, the green database that's there, or the orange database, the question is, who keeps track of the data elements that are going back and forth? And when we understand that 80% of data in our organizations is never utilized at all, it's redundant, obsolete, or trivial, and that becomes a big problem. When I need to go back and make a change to the programs here, if I'm going to change a program, I may have to examine a maximum of 9 programs in this hypothetical scenario. But if I'm going to change the data on this, the worst case scenario is an n times n minus 1 over 2, or 36. And of course, this continues to increase at an increasing rate as we go forward. So this is the last part of the deadly sins that we have here, the idea that we need to understand data-centric thinking in this area. Reviewing the others, again, lack of qualified data leadership, not implementing a robust means of sharing data, not aligning the data program with the IT projects, failing to adequately manage those expectations, not doing the proper sequencing that we need to have, and failing to address the culture and changes that are in there. Because while you all are interested in data, your management thinks that data is something that exists between business and IT. And if they get a little smarter about it, they might realize it should look more like this than the little bat sign that I had up in there, but that we're really swimming in a complete pile of data here. And that what we're really trying to do is make people understand that we need to address this stuff faster, because the process we've been doing up to this point has not been working as well as it should. So this concludes my presentation. We have some upcoming events we want to bring your attention to. In particular, we're going to be gathering in San Diego next month, just before the next one of these webinars in our series, but that we will absolutely be having a wonderful set of these things on target for next year. And we're looking forward now to the fun part, which is the Q&A part. And I'll try my little video here and see if it works a little better. All right, Shannon, back over to you.
This is the fun part. And if you have questions for Peter or for Elliot, feel free to submit them in the Q&A portion of your screen and just answer the most commonly asked questions. Just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday for this webinar with links to the slides, recording, and anything else requested throughout the webinar. So diving in here. So I've been summarizing critical aspects of quote unquote data protection, and within the data governance sphere have focused on not only sequence, but priority of these 4 aspects. Do you see them? Do these seem accurate? Number 1, data inventory and discovery. Number 2, data classification. Number 3, data governance, owners and stewards, custodians, and 4, data catalog.
Goodness, I'm not quite sure I followed the whole thing there, Shannon. You want to try it again and see if...
Yeah. So I've been summarizing.
Sounds like a big challenge.
Yeah, right. I've been summarizing critical aspects of data protection. So the critical aspects of data protection, and within the governance sphere, focused on not only the sequence, but the priority of these four aspects that they've named. So does it sound accurate? So is the order and priority of data protection within data governance, these 4 aspects accurate? Data inventory and discovery, data classification, number 2, data governance, number 3, and owners. Data governance is specifically to owners and stewards. And number 4, data catalog.
I would consider data cataloging as part of data governance, just as a start on that. But I think these are terms that we're doing. And I think what the question is asking is, what priority should we go after in eliminating our data debt? And I think that those are definitely top 4 things that I would do in doing that. Elliot, you want to take a crack at that? I'm not sure how we can help there, because so much of this is personal and depends on the actual organization specifics.
Yeah, and that last bit you mentioned there, Peter, was exactly what I was thinking. Everything that's listed out, they're all critical, but the order in which they are important to the organization you're within or looking at really makes the difference on the priority and the accuracy as well, right? Perhaps the areas within data sourcing and security are perhaps critical to ensure that that data is, compliant today and will be tomorrow. If not, how do we deal with that, right? Peter, you mentioned earlier data governance complementing data strategy, which then complements an organizational strategy. And that's the bit I think we need to focus on here, right? Compliance as a one piece in particular is a key for many. Are you looking to take a company into the public market? Are you in a highly regulated industry? So it really depends on the organization that you're within.
Absolutely. And again, many people will define data governance to encompass that broader perspective in there. I'm sorry we can't give you any more specific information, but you are actually the questioner, more expert at this than either Elliot or I would be able to give you any guidance around that. But it certainly seems like you're headed in the right direction. And the real key to it is making sure that the folks that you're working with understand that this is part of that process I described earlier about trying to get to zero. Right. Once you get to zero, now you can start to build cool new stuff. But if everything's a mess, you've got a mess on your hands that you're going to have to clean up before you can really expect to make significant progress in that. And again, Elliot gave a couple of very good examples of how to take a look at data quality from that perspective.
Perfect. So what are your thoughts on organizations which has no data officer, but the data governance is driven by my platform organization and analytics sits outside of that chain?
My most popular offering right at the moment is executive data literacy. So again, it's hard to say specifically, for your situation that would be the thing to do, but you're the person who understands best in there. So I don't think either of us can come back and counter guess you on this. Maybe a good example would be helpful. And Elliot, I'll tell one, maybe you've got one as well that you can share. The one that I've dealt with most frequently in the last 24 months around this has been that I've actually worked with 10 organizations who have installed Salesforce.com, which is a wonderful package, and then turned it on, and then decided to clean the data. Clearly, we would like a different sequence in that. And I think sequencing is one of the things that you were getting at in terms of what has to be done. I would never turn on Salesforce.com if I hadn't checked the data in there. And the reason for that is because our users are not quite as sophisticated as we'd like them to be. All they know is that when they push a button on Salesforce and they don't get the right result, that to them signifies that Salesforce is not working correctly. I disagree. Salesforce is working perfectly correctly. It's just being fed with bad data back to the garbage in, garbage out scenario. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that as many times as I've mentioned this about Salesforce, they haven't come out here and sponsored one of our webinars, Shannon, on this in order to get them going. Elliot, do you have an analogy that might be useful here as well?
I think I thought about the question in a slightly different way. So starting off, what are your thoughts essentially on organizations which has no data officer, and then gave kind of your more specific scenario there. The way I thought about it was, how would you assess whether not having a data officer is an opportunity? Are you missing anything by not having that person in place? The purpose of that, if you did have a data officer, a chief data officer, whatever way you want to coin that, what would their purpose be? Are they driven within your company to achieve regulatory compliance? Are they there to look at the analytics side of things, governance and policy? Or are they a CDO that's coming in and focusing on monetization and revenue generation? If these in your organization are all covered today, you mentioned analytics as just one example that sits actually outside of the chain at the moment for you. Is this falling off the side of people's desks? Could there be value in the business and bringing certain pieces back to the forefront that speak to the organizational strategy? So, as Peter said, it's very much down to your organization. Are you missing anything at the moment within your approach? And the Salesforce example you gave there is a great one, and you're completely right. The data quality within Salesforce, the garbage in, garbage out, cleaning it on the way is the way to go to ensure that you don't fall into that trap in the first place.
Well, let me add one more piece to what you just said, Elliot, there, because the idea that you have a very specific demarcation. Data is hard enough for people to understand at this point as it is, but if it's in Salesforce or it's not in Salesforce, that's a pretty clear objective piece. And so, as you said, cleaning it on the way in makes a lot more sense than putting it in, meeting some arbitrary deadline that says Salesforce must be installed by, Q2 or whatever the deliverable is, and we're going to put it up come heck or high water in order to do this because that's what the deliverable is. Well, that's letting project management supersede these things. And again, it's IT driving the data program. These are things we want you guys to avoid. Hopefully you'll be able to avoid that going forward. If it's helpful at all, by all means, take some of these slides. And the one I would recommend at that point is a singular focus. The idea that you have this wonderful asset in your organization that is not for some reason being utilized in the fullest capacity. It seems to be a pretty good place to say, let's put somebody in charge and see if we can do better than what we've been doing, which has currently had everybody in charge, meaning nobody's in charge.
So what suggestions do you have for a new data governance group to interface and get buy-in from an established IT department?
The best way to do that, particularly if the IT department is a high-performing IT department, is to tell them that you now own the data requirements and that IT is responsible for implementing the data requirements. And that seems to work out very nicely from a handshake perspective. Most IT organizations, particularly high-performing one, love to have additional support around the idea that somebody is doing the requirements. Again, having IT do them exclusively seems to be a very wrong-headed proposition in that. So that's the way I would go there. Elliot, any thoughts on that? I keep asking for our opinions. We must have some good ones.
Yeah, kind of in line with that. The first thing that came to mind here was, if they're an established IT department, maybe they would be able to recognize what you're trying to achieve if they're that high performing and established. But also at the same time, leadership prioritization came to mind right to begin with there. The project, if within your data governance group, clearly has been put in place for a reason. Had you gone through some of the steps that Peter marked out earlier, and you would think that if it's that aligned with a brand new group being created with potentially leadership buy-in, that as kind of as Peter's alluded to, you can kind of play rank with that you now own those requirements and the implementation is on the IT team.
All right, next one question, Shannon.
Indeed, we get that one a lot. It's a very great question. So how do you see governance of ontologies and taxonomies? Same as simple data catalog, maybe not?
So one of the things we'd like to understand about data catalogs is that we should have a way of keeping them fresh and more importantly, current as we go forward on this, and that we also want to capture some of the tribal knowledge that we have in our organizations and bring it into that type of a situation. When you look at ontologies and taxonomies, that's probably an area that you're not going to be able to have an elevator conversation with an executive about. So more to the point, it's probably imperative that you do a little bit of additional education around that. The way I like to work with executives is to start out with a very simple taxonomy and say that we have retail customers and we might have wholesale customers, and that's neat. And then we decide that we'd like to further break out the retail customers and the wholesale customers so that everybody has a certain language and a certain way of interacting with them. Again, if we tie it back into the Salesforce piece, you'd have two different workflows that would be addressing the different types of problems in that. But as you look at what's happening in there, management tends to look at that and go, oh, that's kind of easy. I get it. You do this, and you break it down to smaller pieces, and then show them an example and say, okay, now what if you want to add a VIP customer? Or what if you add a returning customer? Do you classify a returning customer as a previous customer or somebody who's not a customer? And if they're a VIP customer, how do we rack it? So this is to show the challenges around maintaining taxonomies and ontologies that are there, and that it's not a simple task, that somebody cannot expect instant results from it, but that if you do maintain them, it can be very useful for sorting things in a number of different ways. Elliot, I'll turn it over to you on that one. That's a tougher question.
Yeah, I think you've done a really good job of even summarizing my thoughts on that one. I think speaking.
All right, well, you get to go next time then, so I'll stop cutting you off. Please go ahead.
No, I haven't got a huge amount to add there. I think you summarized it really well. Particularly the thing that resonated with me even from your answer, Peter, there was the correct and compliant piece, making sure that you're starting from a good stead when you're speaking to those two pieces. Yeah, perfect answer.
All right, Shannon, since we're picking out of a basket here, toss a tough one to Elliot then. kidding, Elliot.
Well, there was actually just a kind of a follow-up on that. My question on ontology and taxonomy governance relates to governance of graph and knowledge databases across an organization. Anything you want to add to that?
You're so wonderful, first of all, that you are achieving success with that technology. I would estimate that many organizations would like to hear more about how you've been successful in that. And of course, that is precisely what we are here about, is sharing these experiences so not everybody else has to go through it in there. But the formal maintenance of those things really does come very much aligned with a master data management play in there. Elliot, I'm sure you've worked in those scenarios as well. If it's important that data quality be really, really good, just to help our organizations through, it needs to be really, really, really good if we're going to do master and reference data management. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely agree. It kind of comes back to master quality, knowing within your organization what does good look like, right? Is good what you have in place today? Is your data perhaps complete but not correct? Where's the balance for you guys in the data that you have and you are putting forward? So yeah, absolutely right. I think the correct and compliant piece, and making sure it's correct and complete, whatever is fit for your organization and the purpose of the data you're referencing at that point, that's really the first good step in then being able to build that out across an organization.
And just to be clear for everybody else, Elliot's using the shorthand definition that we all use, which is that data needs to be fit for purpose in there. And that's obviously very subjective, and we don't want to have everything be subjective, but in an actual data use scenario, that is the proper definition for it.
I love it. Well, that is all the questions that we have come through the Q&A portion. I'm just kind of scanning through the chat.
Nobody stumped us chumps, Elliot. This is great. We've survived the day.
It was very clear and understandable, Peter. That's the problem. I'll give everyone just a minute or so just to type anything additional. And just again, a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday with links to the slides and the recording of this session. The question came in and this about data governance office, and how do you get people on board? So we get that question a lot, Peter, as you know, in almost every webinar, regardless of the topic. How do you get executives on board in good data governance and good data management and good data strategy? What's your and maybe Elliot, will start with you, since you haven't answered this question before. What's your elevator pitch? What's your elevator pitch to stress how important this is?
It's incredibly important. Whenever anyone mentions data to me, and I referenced this in my presentation, as did Peter, you get in what you get out of your data. Whatever we're talking about here, even the 3 different examples on the screen here of upcoming events, right? Whether it's management versus governance, strategy, best practices, or modeling fundamentals, it comes down to you get what you put into it, and what you put into it needs to be an ongoing effort. Peter kind of majored for a part of that presentation on projects versus programs. If you working on a project basis, the reality is that your data and the quality of it and the management processes you have in place have a lifespan to it. If you have a full program in place that's cross-functional, that's really what's going to lead you to broader and longer term success for the data that you have today, the success you have with it today, but also ensuring that, perhaps you are a CIO who has that short lifespan. After that CIO leaves after a couple of years and the new one comes in, that data in place already is set up for success in the future. So that ongoing and longevity piece is always what strikes with me.
I can't say it any better, Elliot. Let's just cut it there. It's a great end point on our discussion today.
Agreed. Well, thank you both so much. Thanks to Validity for sponsoring today's webinar. And thanks, Peter, for a great session as always. Really appreciate it. Again, just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday with links to the slides and the recording for everyone. If you don't receive it within the next couple of days, give me a quick shout out, give me an email. All right, everybody. Well, thank you. I hope you all have a great day. Thanks to all of our attendees for being so engaged. Always, you guys are always so amazing. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy.
Thanks, Elliot. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Shannon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.